Hey guys, so today I'm going to be talking a little bit about the autobiography Nobody Nowhere by Donna Williams. It's basically about Donna's journey living in a world that doesn't understand autism. So Donna was born in the 60s, and during this time there wasn't a lot of knowledge about autism, so we're going to see that consistently throughout the book. During Donna's younger years, she ran about the town and refused to conform to her mother's ideal sense of what a little girl should be. In other words, she was constantly dirty, she was sleeping in sheds, she was rarely ever home. However, she always found friends at the park. She was constantly going to the park and meeting new people, and I think this is where we can start to see her development of kind of like a multiple personality thing. She would meet people at the park and she would just admire their lives so much and their personalities so much she would try to mirror those things, which I know one of her coping mechanisms was to mimic people, so I can't help but see that relationship between the two, between her trying to be like these other people and then the mimicking aspect of her coping mechanism. But one of the first relationships she ever made that made her feel something was with her little brother Tim when he was born. I think this is because they were alike in many ways. They were both pretty hyperactive. They were very imaginative, and they always played games together when they were little. But unfortunately, when Tim grew older, their relationship began to dwindle, which really put a strain on Donna's emotional well-being, because of the fact he was the first person to really make her feel anything. But the inconsistency of her childhood also translated into school, so not only was she never home, she was also never going to school. She was always transitioning to somewhere new despite the distance. At one part in the book, she describes herself trying to get into a school that was like really far. It was like another county away, and she had to basically lie and tell the school that she had just moved there and her mom was working a lot, so she couldn't be present to enroll her in the school. I think eventually Donna ended up dropping out of school towards the end, towards her last years of high school, and she decided to get a job. She didn't feel right in the high school setting. She didn't feel like she fit in. And she ended up getting an apartment, and it was just like this cycle where she was constantly getting new jobs, she was constantly moving, and I think that was something that made her feel safe because it was something that she had experienced a lot when she was a child already, so she was used to that kind of life. Once Donna got a little older, she really just started to try and understand herself a little bit more. She ended up going to see a counselor, and they became friends very quickly. The counselor was probably one of the first people to really try and understand Donna and her experiences. Donna had ended up having this huge breaking point, which left her feeling delusional, which would often happen to her when she was having anxiety. She just wouldn't know who she was or where she was or anything, and so thankfully she ended up going to the hospital and finding her friend, her counselor friend, and they worked through it. But Donna, despite her struggles, she was really good at making friends from an early age on. Like I said, she was always at the park making friends as a child, and she also did the same thing into her adulthood.
But despite this, she was always kind of feeling empty, and I think that was from the lack of understanding and knowledge that other people had about her and how she would communicate. But she did end up going to college and falling in love with someone who could communicate like her. But she decided to end it because it just kind of was starting to feel too real. She didn't like feeling things. So after that, she ended up traveling the world and just trying to find that inconsistency that was so, like, that resonated with her so much. But the book ends with her going back home, and she just really wanted to find other people like her who communicated like her, and she started to realize that she had a lot of common similarities with people who had autism, and so she tried to explore that a little bit by moving back home. A couple of the common themes that are present in Donna's book, Nobody Nowhere, are violence and misconceptions / uneducated views about, I guess, her disability or her condition. For violence, it was just so consistent. Violence was so consistent in her life, constantly enacted against her from her mom and her older brother. They would often gang up on her, physically and mentally, constantly calling her names, and this ended up kind of manifesting into anxiety and frustration at the world, especially if anyone did anything that made her feel like she thought she was crazy. There's multiple accounts in the book where she is just really sensitive to the way people treat her, and this definitely, I think, is a result from how her family just made her feel like she just wasn't worthy or didn't fit in. However, she also talks about how she was okay with the violence. Unlike things like love or comfort or just like positive emotions and feelings, she was okay with violence. And on page 38 she says, "I could comprehend the action of another person, particularly if they were extreme, but I had trouble coping with whole people. Their motivations and expectations, particularly to do with giving and receiving. With violence, I knew where I stood." So in other words, she had a hard time with the expectation of giving and receiving. Like, if you love somebody, that's kind of like a reciprocal thing, whereas the violence, it was just her mom. She would come home from school and her mom would just beat on her, and she wasn't expected to do anything but just kind of take it. This is also a common theme that traveled into her adulthood. She was treated like that. She was treated violently from boyfriends, and towards the end of the book, there's kind of like this realization about her early childhood when she was a toddler and an infant. She has a conversation with her aunt that reveals how abused she was when she was a baby. Moving on to misconceptions and uneducated views, Donna's coping mechanisms and behavior were results of this misunderstanding of her condition. She would often do things to help soothe her. She would mimic people. She would switch the light switches on and off a lot. A couple other things she would do. Anyway, just a couple of things like that. But people would just take those things and label them as her being insane. And she talks a lot about her life as a viewer behind glass, and I think that's why, because she had these modes of communication, coping skills that she understood but nobody else could understand. So she ended up just accepting that she was living in her own world when she was younger. But she ended up really demonstrating the power of understanding and recognizing the world between us and them. When she was helping out at a school, and there was another little girl there who had autism, and she was able to successfully communicate with her, and the people that were working there could see that, and it ended up being like this really great enlightenment moment for everyone. So, like I said earlier, a couple of things that Donna would do to be able to communicate with people was kind of like create a different personality that was separate from herself. She was kind of just disassociating with herself when she was interacting with people because she was afraid that they wouldn't accept her for who she was. So Willie was the first character she made. She was really young when she created Willie, and he was actually a monster under her bed. She explains how Willie would come out of his shell when she was angry or when she needed to be sly or have wit and intelligence. She would often turn into Willie when she was communicating with her mother. But Carol was based off of a friend she had made at the park when she was really young. She had admired Carol and her family so much that she just wanted to be Carol. And Carol's personality was put on when she wanted to be sociable or friendly or quote-unquote normal. And she describes Carol as somebody that everybody would just like. And so she was Carol quite a bit when she was in her 20s, her early 20s, making friends and going to college. In the end, I think Donna's book kind of has a happy ending, just with her having this self-realization that she is who she is and no one is going to be able to change her because that's just the fact of life. And I think it's kind of an empowering ending because she leaves off, like I said, with her communicating with another person, a child, on the same level as the way she likes to communicate, and that makes her feel comfortable, and it ended up being kind of a learning experience for herself as well as the people at the school that she had kind of volunteered at. So yeah, I think in the end it's powerful. It's a really powerful book and a really powerful example of how damaging it can be to not allow somebody to be themselves. And there's so many different ways that people communicate, and thankfully Donna was able to overcome her past and her childhood, and now she's kind of an advocate for autism awareness. And one thing that I really liked about her book is at the end she had a list of behaviors that are pretty similar for people who are on the spectrum. So if just kind of to teach you what some of those coping mechanisms are, and it was awesome. I think it just added another layer of learning to her book, and I would definitely recommend reading it if you guys have a chance. Thank you.